Canada's Parliament is set to pass a tough new crime bill. It's called the Safe Streets and Communities Act, and it's stirring up an emotional debate. On one side, politicians and victims groups who say we're soft on crime. On the other, critics who say the new measures will mean overcrowded prisons and a huge tax bill. So tonight, we take a look at whether putting more people behind bars will ultimately make us safer. Ottawa is about to crack down on crime, drug trafficking, violent offenders, child pornography. Soon, when police catch criminals, a new bill on its way to becoming law could mean they'll be behind bars for a lot longer. But critics of the move insist it will put many more men and women into an already dangerously overcrowded prison system. Kim Pate of the Elizabeth Fry Society says that's a recipe for disaster.
We'll increasingly see the prisons becoming the warehouse for those who will not and cannot be met somewhere else, and they'll be increasingly brutalizing warehouses.
That warehousing is already happening, and the head of Corrections Canada knows it, says Correctional Ombudsman Howard Sapers.
The Correctional Services sort of worst case scenario projection right now is that about 1 in 3 cells will be double bunked.
Inmates double and even triple bunked in some jails. A prison system bursting at the seams, and a new bill that will turn the pressure up another notch. This crime bill is actually 9 pieces of legislation rolled up into one. It covers everything from victims of terrorism to sexual offenses against children. Much of it is being well received and faces little opposition. But there are 2 aspects of this bill that are getting a lot of attention: mandatory minimum sentences for drug crimes and the elimination of house arrest in certain cases. It's these 2 measures that are expected to put a lot more people behind bars.
Hello there.
Hi, Minister. Carolyn Jarvis. Canada's Justice Minister Rob Nicholson says changes are necessary to create a safer society.
I think all these measures are very reasonable, and I send out the correct message to people. First of all, don't get involved with this activity to begin with. Don't be selling drugs around schools. Don't be molesting children. Don't get on a plane somewhere and bring drugs into Canada, because there will be serious consequences.
Supporters of the bill, like Vancouver lawyer Ben Perrin, say this is what we are up against: a growing drug industry backed by crime bosses threatening communities.
Studies here in British Columbia found the vast majority of individuals who cultivate marijuana, 85% of them are directly involved in some way in organized criminal activity. 80% of the marijuana grow operation production in British Columbia is exported into the United States and other countries. And the vast majority of those who are apprehended never see a single day in jail.
So are you saying that the sentences that our courts have been applying aren't just?
They're not appropriate at all.
It sounds simple. Crack down on crime, put more people behind bars, and streets are safer. You hear the same law and order message in the United States. But there, a decades-long war on drugs filled the prisons and left many states unable to pay the bill. Now, American wardens like Ken McKee are sounding surprisingly progressive.
The culture over the past 20, 50, 70 years in terms of prison is lock them up. And that mindset is very tough to break down.
Prisons too crowded and too costly. Faced with raising taxes to pay the ballooning bills, politicians decided on reforms to reduce the prison population instead. In high-crime states like Michigan, this is now seen as progress. A prison shut down, abandoned cells, and deserted prison yards, partly due to new prisoner-friendly programs.
We're not going to rehabilitate you, but we're going to try to help you make better decisions.
Michigan and other U.S. states are reversing the old lock-em-up approach, an approach that cost taxpayers billions and threatened to empty government coffers. In Canada, Pate says if tough-on-crime policies pass here, taxpayers will also be hurting.
It's going to impact every single one of us. It'll impact your pension, my pension, impact my kids, whether they'll get an educational, post-secondary education. It'll impact their kids as to whether they have childcare. It'll impact future generations in terms of health care. It will be one of the biggest economic and fiscal disasters that we could embark upon, and it'll be the biggest social disaster.
That impact adds up, one prisoner at a time. It costs $117,000 a year to keep a federal inmate behind bars. That's 3 times the average annual wage in Canada. A cell in a Canadian prison costs $320 a day, the price of a very good hotel room in downtown Toronto. Jen Sputek is one of the people who's been in those expensive cells. She spent half her life in custody for various crimes. It cost the Canadian taxpayer hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep her behind bars, an investment that never really dealt with her problems.
If you do something wrong, if you break a law, then you should go to jail and do your time. But what do we do with those people after that? You know, we can't just send people to jail for 10 or 15 or 20 years and expect them to get out and be able to function in society.
A child prostitute and convicted crack dealer, Sputek says tough on crime laws don't take into account each person's story.
Nobody wakes up when they're 5 years old and thinks, I'm going to be a crack dealer when I grow up. I want to go to the penitentiary, or I want to be a child prostitute.
Tougher sentencing means many more of those pricey prison cells, and that bill goes in part to the provinces. But Ontario and Quebec have said they won't pay for those new facilities, which prompted this response from the Prime Minister on Global's The West Bloc.
There's constitutional responsibilities of all governments to enforce laws and protect people. And I think, I've seen the data. The people of Ontario and Quebec expect that their government will work with the federal government to make sure we have safe streets and safe communities.
But Ottawa isn't answering all the questions. There's a price tag that goes with the promise to keep streets safe. No one is saying exactly how big it is or what it will do to the prisons.
How many more people will this bill put in Canada's prison system?
We have been very clear that we will make sure that the capacity is there, and I appreciate the fact that people are concerned.
Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, there must be some.
Any increase will be marginal in terms of overall. They'll have a look at this in a year or two and say, well, there wasn't this huge explosion that some of our critics that were talking about.
Back in Michigan, the cost of their crackdown on crime in the 80s and 90s was so high, the state looked for ways to cut down the prison population. They released more than 8,000 convicts after they served their minimum sentences. Guys like Larry Jones, a burglar with a long rap sheet.
Just give yourself an opportunity to do better and be better, a better father, a better man.
At one time, half of all parolees ended up right back in prison. Now, that number is down to 1 in 3. Jones was paroled again this year, but this time he had help on the outside. Free clothes and housing in a neighborhood where he feels so at home, he does volunteer work.
I get up and I walk like a 6-block radius and pick up trash every morning in the neighborhood. By me getting up, doing that, that gives me, right, the break that I need, right? And it takes me over into being a better person.
It's all subsidized by the state, a drastic departure from the tough talk they're used to south of the border. It's also a lot cheaper. Closing prisons saved the state of Michigan a whopping $300 million.
In your opinion, somebody who's been in this industry for 20 plus years, is this program working?
Yes, I believe it is.
You're seeing people go out into the community and make it in the community and not come back into your prison.
That's true. The recidivism rate is down. Prisoners aren't coming back to prison like they did in the past. Violent crime, regular crime is down in Michigan, and we're closing prisons. We've closed 14 prisons over the last number of years, including some camps.
But there was more to the plan than programs and closing prisons. The state also repealed mandatory drug sentences, the very thing Canada's Justice Minister is about to introduce.
With respect to the mandatory sentencing, we send out the message to these individuals that there will be serious consequences. And getting some of these people off the street will better protect Canadians, and that's our philosophy and that's our belief.
But Pate says tougher sentences simply don't work as a deterrent.
If deterrence worked, then the United States should be the safest, most crime-free place in the entire universe because they've incarcerated historically people at the greatest rate. In fact, we've seen in the United States has not created safer communities. In fact, quite the opposite.
At the end of the day, whatever critics say and whatever the experience south of the border, the Harper government knows that today at least, being tough on crime is good politics in Canada. And what happens in the prisons is tomorrow's problem.
Next on 16 by 9 is the WWE.
I am no danger to anybody in WWE.
Beating up on this guy.